Gentlemen, I think this is a very important discussion that has developed over the course of several years. When we first looked at this, we looked at how can we help control, to exactly what Senator Zahn highlighted, runaway investment in our schools, runaway spending in our school districts. You only need to go to a couple school districts in the state of Iowa, Senator Zahn, to see where they built colossal stadiums, and then they're the first ones to raise their hand and say, but I don't have any money to fix the roof this year. How do we get to a point where we can lay out a roadmap for schools that is both meaningful and purposeful, that respects the taxpayer and the property owner? I think what Senator Dawson has done in this bill has laid out a very good roadmap for where we want to be. Because this bill focuses specifically in three areas: infrastructure, technology, and security. This $19 billion, in my mind, is a direct investment in all three of those things. And we have set out a roadmap for not only our school districts, but for our communities. Because when $19 billion returns itself to the community in the form of a new classroom, or a larger school, or a security apparatus for that school, or better technology for the next generation of learners, that's money directly invested back in the community. When that $3 billion goes back to help buy down the property tax relief that we just voted on, that's money back in taxpayers' pockets. Money that they have some voice in what they do with it, and that they're not worried about a bond issue that goes forward sometime 5, 10, 20 years in the future, where they have no ability to have a voice in where that goes. So let me talk with you about a couple of specific things. I've got 4 kids, two of them in school, 2 of them a handful. They're pretty fantastic, but when they come home now, the schools that I grew up with, the school that my grandmother taught at, had not changed a whole lot. We got a textbook, we had a chalkboard, and we learned, we came home, we filled out a sheet of paper, and we turned in our homework. The reality is the schools in Iowa today are continuing not only to consolidate, but they're innovating. How we teach classes. If you're in shop now, you might go across town and go to a state-of-the-art shop where you're actually doing a 3D printer that is going to turn out an element that you might use somewhere else in your life. Rural schools might not have that option, but through partnership, through infrastructure, they're now going to have a long-term opportunity to bring in some of the best technology into the classroom and return it back to our community. Today, Senator Dotzler and I were invited to come over and sit on the Innovation Council, and time after time, what I heard from Iowa employers was, where do we get the workforce? Where do we get the smart, talented individuals who might show up on an east or west coast, but we're having a hard time keeping it here in Iowa? This is an investment in that. And importantly, when we talk about how this money is being raised, let's not forget that of this $19 billion investment, more than 20% of it is coming from sales tax for folks out of state. 20% that we're not paying for as Iowans, but we are investing back in our state. If we want that to grow, we need to have a workforce that helps grow. So for every student that graduates and stays in our state and produces something, guess what? We build that 20% every single time. More and more money being invested into our schools, for our kids, for our future. I want to highlight something just very quickly. We worked together with Senator Carlin on a bill last year for suicide prevention in schools. It overwhelmingly becomes an area where we need not only more mental health in schools, but schools that are built in a way and constructed in a way that serves student needs. One of the biggest concerns that I have in my district is the ability to be safe for our children, for my kids, for your grandchildren in schools. In some counties here in Iowa, if there were to be a crisis in the school, it might be 20 minutes before the first deputy is able to be on scene. And we know all too well that those first 5 minutes are critical. And if we don't have a response plan in place, if we do not have an integrated security system in place, children could lose their life, and so could educators. Right here in Iowa, a little group based out of Muscatine, Fighting Chance Solutions, invented this simple device. Slides on the edge of a door and basically barricades the door from an outside intruder. Daniel Nielsen, who's the founder of this, was a social studies teacher, and he believed that, you know what, I've been given so few tools to protect my kids, and his wife was a kindergarten teacher. that I went and invented this on my own. $50. And I don't care what we use. I'm agnostic towards who the vendor is, who the person is, but it's the story of what Iowa Innovation does to have to protect our kids in school. That's why it's so important that this infrastructure bill talks about what we're doing in a comprehensive way for security in our state. I don't consider this a tax that goes unwisely invested. I consider this a commitment to where we see our school, where we see our children, and where we see our communities for the next 20 years. $3 billion back in Iowans' pockets. $19 billion overall invested in first-class education. $19 billion invested in our rural, urban, and local communities. And most importantly, $19 billion to help the future of Iowa through the young men and women that you see in this room. Mr. President, I strongly support this bill.